and it's open. One of the few plantations that are open today. And here we are at the entrance, I think, yes, of Laura Plantation, and we find ourselves at the Laura Plantation store, established in 1805. And here we are in front of the big house. Laura was built in 1805, which makes it, 216 or 217 years old. It is French Creole architecture, and it was built by expert slave labor, with a detached kitchen to minimize fire risk and to keep the house cooler during our long, hot, smothering southern nights. Its beauty is ageless, timeless, lace and fineness, but its history is horrific. As always, a bevy of live oak trees around, all in some stage of growth and decay. And here we move into the museum, where visitors can get a real taste of life on a sugarcane plantation 200 years ago. There are artifacts regarding skilled labor. And here we see a cobbler's bench and sample bricks that were actually produced on the grounds of the plantation. We get a taste here of religion, and as this is a Creole plantation, most of the people were Roman Catholic. Speaking of Creole, what exactly is a Creole? Now, there are lots of thoughts and opinions, but a Creole basically meets three criteria. One, they're generally Roman Catholic, generally French speakers or descended from French-speaking people, and generally settled in Louisiana or in the Deep South. And here we have the baptism records of 28 slave children, along with the names of their godmother and godfather, or their Nanan and Paran. Here's a bit of history regarding the First Baptist Church of Vacherie, Protestant church, and some of the original leaders, leaders from history. And that brings us to domestic life, including how clothing was sewn and maintained, and just the ins and outs of day-to-day living on the plantation, and the role of the maid, and or as she was called in the post-Civil War era, the help. And we've had so many stereotypes of that. Think of these women when you read some of Maya Angelou's poems, more popular poetry, especially things like "And Still I Rise." And here we are, still rising. As offensive as these documents are, this is history. Chattel slavery. So just a moment of respectful silence as we just consider the implications and fallout of these documents. Here we have slave houses, a long row of them, all property of the owner, as well as the human beings themselves, also property of the owner, including, in some cases, entire families, in many cases splintered and severed, and often without a male head, children and their mothers. Just horrific. Brings us to slave trade and just some of the documents associated with it. And again, just consider the implications and the fallout that ensued and still has its DNA in American history. Just enough documentation to give you a sense of what was going on without being overbearing. And then we leave there and we get a taste of medicine and health and the trauma and the contagion and the midwives and the dangerous occupations and the limited medical services and access. All there. Just a sense of what our ancestors had to endure. Things we already know, but pictures and documents to just bring it all back. And as we leave the museum, we overlook the gardens en route to the slave quarters themselves. We stop off at this little hitching station where slaves were often processed. They had many here, 200, but they had very little in common. The only unity they had was common ownership. But they didn't often worship the same way or eat the same food or speak the same language. And that was all by design, to help keep chaos among the slaves, at least the 200 slaves that occupied these homes, would have unified and risen up against a handful of owners. And so we're standing in front of Laura Plantation gift shop, heading back toward the car. And this place is pretty well laid out. Nice parking area. Fantastic gift shop. And just well manicured. Even a little waiting area for groups who come by bus. Lots of good information. Well thought out place. Well, this is Dr. B. I am your Cajun Connection. And we are concluding our tour of Laura Plantation. We'll catch you in the next video.